navigating a minefield of betrayal, surviving on rumors, and vanishing before your allies became enemies. It was a job paid in silver and soaked in lies. So let's say you've taken the job. You've been double-crossed, or you soon will be. And now, you're wondering what kind of magical weapons are in your arsenal, right? Forget the fantasy. There are no spring-loaded wrist daggers or smoke bombs crafted by ancient guilds. No enchanted blades humming with dark power. Your gear? It was pitiful. If you were lucky, and by that I mean kissed by the gods, found a gold king in a dead man's boot, kind of lucky, yet a halfway decent dagger. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't curved like a mythical beast fong. It was just sharp, hopefully not covered in rust. Ideally, it didn't smell like the last victim you used it on. Poison? Yes, it existed. But it wasn't the elegant drop of death that novels describe. Most were a chaotic mix of herbs, minerals, animal bile, or whatever the local alchemist could scrape together. Some worked instantly. Others took days. Some just made the victim violently ill, then very angry. And if you got the dosage wrong, you might poison yourself instead. No one was handing out labels or antidotes. Ropes? Versatile, sure. You could strangle, tie, scale, or trip someone with one, but only if you didn't get tangled up or forget the knot halfway through. Bows? Useful in theory, but bulky, noisy, and impossible to carry into a lord's manor disguised as a traveling flower merchant. Which is why most assassinations weren't from a distance. They weren't stylish. They were personal, face-to-face, knife to throat, quick and quiet if you were good, bloody and botched if you weren't. There was no time for flashy marksmanship or elegant techniques. You didn't line up a perfect shot under a glowing moon with time to adjust your stance and take a deep breath. No, this was about speed, silence, and survival. If you could get in, do the job, and slip out before anyone noticed the blood on the floor, that was a win. A messy win, but a win nonetheless. Forget backup. You didn't get a second chance. If your knife bent at the wrong angle, snapped mid-strike, or took an unexpected tumble into a well, you had to get creative and fast. What did you use? A broken slate tile from the roof? Maybe. A rusted nail left behind by a careless builder? Worth a shot. The jagged edge of a shoe buckle, used with intent and desperation? Welcome to your arsenal. Your tools weren't neatly laid out in a velvet line box. They were shoved inside boots, sewn into hems, stuffed into hidden compartments, or, yes, baked into hollowed-out loaves of bread, if necessary. Not because you were clever, but because your life depended on it. These weapons weren't just instruments. They were your livelihood, your escape plan, and the only form of job security you had. There were no maintenance breaks between missions, no polishing sessions or upgrades. If your gear survived a hit, you thanked the stars. If it didn't, you figured something else out, because the one certainty was this: your blade wouldn't make the kill. You would, and you'd have to do it with whatever you could hold tightly and aim precisely. And let's make one thing very clear. You weren't hired to sneak up on some drunk in the gutter behind tavern. No one paid silver for street thugs or sleepy candle makers. The people who hired you had very specific names in mind. Nobles, warlords, bishops who smelled too much like gold, even members of the royal family. High-ranking, heavily protected, utterly paranoid targets. These weren't easy marks. They were the hardest people to kill. Let's start with the guards, dozens of them. Not lazy men half-dozing in armor. These were trained, loyal, and paid well to watch every corner and corridor. They weren't just positioned at the front gate. They were everywhere, at staircases, balconies, doorways, even behind curtains. Some just stood around looking fierce and waiting for someone to twitch wrong. You'd have to spend days, sometimes weeks, just mapping their patrols, memorizing every creaky step, and calculating how long it took the wheezing guard on the night shift to catch his breath after a stair climb. Then there were the castles themselves. These weren't cozy manors with open windows. They were fortresses, gates made of reinforced iron, murder holes designed to rain death on intruders. Moats filled with more than just cold water. Think snapping jaws, disease, and dark, icy depths. And if you got lucky and avoided drowning, arrows, crossbows, boiling oil. Yes, boiling oil. Your job description might as well have included high risk of being flambéed for sneaking. The challenge didn't end with stone walls and armed guards. The real threat was the staff, the cooks, the maids, the stable boys, the ever-watchful scribes. You walk funny, talk strange, or give the wrong greeting, and suddenly everyone knows you don't belong. And you'd be amazed how fast a kitchen boy can whisper a warning to the captain of the guard when it means saving his own skin. In short, you weren't just dodging swords. You were dodging rumors. Gossip in the Middle Ages traveled faster than any messenger pigeon if someone thought it might save their neck or earn a coin. And finally, the target. These weren't clueless aristocrats sipping wine in a daze. They were hunted people. They knew every shadow might hold a threat. They didn't dine without a tester sampling their food. They didn't sleep without locks, guards, and decoys. Some even rotated bedrooms nightly or slept in disguise, like a never-ending game of murderous musical chairs. Even a rare public appearance wasn't a golden opportunity. A feast might seem like the perfect place. Alcohol, noise, distractions. But guess what? Everyone else was drinking too, including you if you had to blend in. The guards were still watching. The royal dogs could sniff you out. The jester might notice your twitchy fingers. And there were at least 50 drunk partygoers with tankards ready to scream if you made a move. Getting within striking distance took weeks of preparation. Maybe you posed as a servant, bribed a cleaner, or spent days hiding in barrels full of rotting onions. And when the moment came, you had one shot. Just one. It had to be fast, quiet, clean, if possible, and most importantly, gone before the blood cooled. If you failed, you didn't get a warning. You became a message. Your body would be strung up outside the city walls with a sign that said, "Nice try." No one would bother learning your name. And forget the sleek, heroic look. You're probably picturing black leather armor, flowing capes, and mysterious hoods catching moonlight just right. In reality, you look like a half-sick goat herder with a guilty conscience and a questionable odor. Disguises weren't stylish. They were dirty, patched, and designed not to attract attention. Because the moment you stood out, your job and your life was over. Forget fancy cloaks sewn with hidden pockets or armor designed to fold away like magic. You didn't have gear custom fitted by a secret artisan in the woods. What you wore depended entirely on what you could scrounge, steal, or borrow from the dead. Maybe it was peasant clothing that hadn't seen a wash in months. Maybe a monk's robe that dragged behind you like a curtain. Maybe the ill-fitting uniform of a guard who wouldn't be needing it anymore, and still smelled like sweat, onions, and fear. You weren't trying to look cool. You were trying to disappear into the backdrop. But here's the thing. Everyone in the Middle Ages looked a little suspicious. No one had bathed. Everyone limped from old injuries. Half the population had visible rashes. So blending in wasn't about appearing normal. It was about appearing boring. The moment you fidgeted too much, adjusted your belt too often to hide that cloth-wrapped dagger, or glanced twice at a guard, you were done. Masks? Forget about it. There were no sleek disguises or porcelain theatrics. Covering your face made you look like a plague victim, which did keep people away, but also meant you'd never get inside a noble's feast without someone sounding the alarm. If you were questioned, your cover story had to arrive faster than your heartbeat. "I'm Brother Tobias," you'd say with a half-bow. Caretaker of the chapel rooftop tiles and silent vows. Let's say you made it through the gates. You're inside. You've tricked the guards. You've smiled at the steward. Now you're deep inside enemy territory, pretending you belong. But noble households weren't filled with idiots. Servants noticed. They knew each other by name, by smell, by how someone held a broom. One unfamiliar face, one wrong answer about the cook's cat or the name of the wine steward. And suddenly, you're one innocent "who are you?" away from being beaten unconscious with a pewter goblet. And if the disguise worked, congrats, but the real work had only just begun. Now you had to stay in character. Hours of pretending to polish armor or wash sheets while pretending not to notice the parade of overly stab-worthy people wandering by. Forget wigs. Those didn't exist. If you needed to look older, younger, or like someone else entirely, your tools were dirt, squinting, posture, and prayer. If you were bold, maybe you'd glue on a fake beard with sticky honey and hope no one tried to touch it. Your disguise didn't protect you. It just bought you 5 minutes of confusion. After that, you had to vanish, act, or kill. And if someone saw through it, may the gods help you, because no one wants to die wearing a nun's habit, hiding in a bishop's laundry room, holding a bloody dagger, especially on a feast day. Let's talk about teamwork. There wasn't any. You didn't have a crew, a crossbow-wielding buddy, or a handler feeding you coded messages from shadowy hideout. You had you. Just you, a dull blade, and enough anxiety to sharpen it. No guild watched over you. No grand brotherhood passed you wisdom. The idea of an assassin network was mostly a fantasy shared over mugs of beer by people who'd never even held a knife. Why the loneliness? Because every single relationship was a liability. The fewer people who knew you existed, the longer you stayed breathing. Even your client didn't know your real name. And if they did, you were already planning an escape route in case they got creative with betrayal. You didn't have friends. Friends asked questions. Lovers noticed your bruises, the blood on your boots, and the nightmares that woke you up clutching your blade. You couldn't settle down. You couldn't let anyone close enough to care. One person recognizing your face in a marketplace, and suddenly your name was being whispered, and not in admiration. Even among criminals, you were an outsider. Thieves, sociable. Smugglers, friendly. You were the person people whispered about, the one who made people disappear. Some feared you. Others just didn't want to sit next to someone who might bring torches and pitchforks to their door. And there was no sympathy. No one wanted to hear about your aching bones or the psychological weight of strangling a bishop in his sleep. You couldn't talk about it. If you did, people either laughed like you were making it up or took 2 steps back and reached for a weapon. So you learned to stay quiet. At inns, you chose the darkest corner. Sat with your back to the wall. Never got drunk. Never stayed more than one night. You gave no name unless coin came first. And even then, it was probably a fake one. Being a medieval assassin meant becoming a master of disappearance. Not just in crowds, but from everything. Comfort, connection, even your own identity. You erased yourself piece by piece. Let's say you took the job. You planned the route. You bribed the doorman. You dressed like a chimney sweep and waited for the perfect moment. And then you froze. The target turned. They were holding a child. Your hand shook. Your timing failed. Guess what? You're dead now. Because failure in this world wasn't a disappointing paycheck or a quiet firing. It was a public execution, loud, brutal, and designed to make others think twice. If you were lucky, they hanged you. If not, fire, iron, wheels, or devices with names like the Soul Splitter or the Bone Cracker's Delight. One failed kill meant your name, and your face were now tacked to every tavern wall in a 30-mile radius. And suddenly, the guards you once slipped past without effort, they were on high alert, blood in their eyes, coin in their pockets. And that's not even the worst part. Sometimes the threat wasn't your target. It was your employer. If you failed, you were now a dangerous loose end. Someone who might be caught, interrogated, tortured. You knew names. You knew faces. The same person who handed you a job might now hand someone else a coin purse and say, "Clean it up." And there were no second chances. No, oops, the blade slipped. Mind if I try again tomorrow? You had one shot, one moment in time. Miss it, and all you had left was a prayer that your death would be quick and your client wouldn't leave a witness. And even success had its price. Let's say it went perfectly. The dagger found its mark. No scream, no alarm. A noble drops like a sack of grain onto the stone floor, and history changes with a whisper. Congratulations. Now run. Because a successful assassin didn't sip wine on a tower while the city burned in the distance. A successful assassin fled. Through stables, into sewers, across rooftops, with blood on their hands and dogs already sniffing the trail. There was no time for celebration. No drinks with colleagues. No thank you note from the client. The moment the job was done, your next task began. Don't get caught. You'd already planned your escape, hopefully. Backup routes. Disguises. Maybe a fisherman who owed you a favor, or a horse stashed behind a church stable. You had to be gone before the city realized the scandal had just exploded inside its highest walls. Because once it did, lockdown, closed gates, armed patrols, Sketches with your vague face and the words, armed. Extremely stabby. Do not approach. And that client you trusted to pay up? Good luck. They were likely long gone. Or worse, watching you from the shadows, deciding whether it might be safer to eliminate you next. Because here's the ugly truth. A completed contract made you more dangerous than ever. You'd proven you could break through walls, guards, secrets. You knew too much. So even when you succeeded, you didn't win. You just added one more ghost to your name and kept running. So, what exactly did you win after pulling off a flawless assassination? A week of paranoia-fueled wandering, sleeping in haylofts that reeked of goat, bribing ferrymen with your last coins, shaving in puddles with a stolen razor, and pretending your name was Brother Lucian while traveling with a group of monks heading east. That was your prize. Because success didn't mean safety. It meant starting over from scratch, again, somewhere else, with new enemies, a new fake name, and even more suspicion pointed in your direction. You made the kill. Great. Now run for your life. And as if being poor, hunted, and half-feral wasn't miserable enough, you also had to deal with the delightful cherry on top, medieval superstition. People in the Middle Ages didn't just fear assassins. They believed you were cursed. Not a man with a blade, but a creature of darkness. Someone who consorted with demons, brewed potions in the light of the blood moon, and whispered death into the wind. No one could believe a mortal could sneak past guards and vanish into the night. So, they made up something worse. Some said assassins could shapeshift. Others swore you were invisible unless splashed with holy water. One wildly popular theory insisted you made pacts with forest spirits and could kill people just by breathing near a wall. Imagine walking through a quiet village after a job and hearing a mother hiss to her child, "Don't look at him. He'll hex the baby." Even your gear made people suspicious. That dagger? Obviously forged in a cursed forge. That herbal powder? Not poison, witchcraft. Stirred, no doubt, with a toad's toe under the waning moon. Your tools weren't weapons. They were evidence of black magic. Now, you might think all this fear would work in your favor. After all, terrified villagers might steer clear of you, right? Wrong. Superstition doesn't inspire caution. It inspires mobs. Loud, sweaty mobs with torches, farm tools, and the blind rage of people who don't want to be the next mysterious death. If someone in town died unexpectedly, choked on a bone, fell off a ladder, sneezed too hard, suddenly whispers started. Was it the Shadow Man? The stranger who never finished his stew? You could be chased out, beaten, or burned alive just for being nearby. So you moved constantly, never lingered. One day in a town, and you were already scanning rooftops for signs of smoke. One odd item in your pocket, foreign coins, dried herbs, even an accent too sharp, and someone might start yelling sorcerer while striking a flint. In the Middle Ages, anything unusual was considered a threat, and threats weren't discussed. They were destroyed. And then there was poison, the so-called elegant weapon of the trade. Silent, subtle, clean. No screaming. No bloody aftermath. Just a sip, a cough, a slump. Sound classy, right? The reality? Poisoning someone in the medieval world was like trying to win a duel with bad soup and wishful thinking. First, there were no neat capsules, no precise dosages. You didn't have access to refined toxins or pharmaceutical-grade death. You had plants, mushrooms, mold, maybe the occasional toad, if you were daring. And if you were desperate, you'd scrape questionable substances off tree bark and hope they did something. You didn't measure. You guessed. A pinch here, a drop there, and prayed it was enough. Not too much, not too little. Too little, and the noble just gets a stomachache and more suspicious. Too much, and you're the one foaming at the mouth before dessert. And good luck actually getting the poison into the target. Medieval kitchens were absolute chaos. There were guards, tasters, dogs, food testers, stewards, and servants, all watching the meal like it was a state secret. Even if you did slip in the poison, it might take hours or days. You'd have to wait while your victim dined, laughed, drank, and perhaps sang. Then maybe they'd clutch their chest or pale slightly. But even then, if they survived, who would they blame? The cook? The taster? No, you. The strange, quiet man with the twitchy eyes and herbal knowledge. Suddenly, everyone wanted to test your tea. And if you were caught, you didn't get a fair trial. You got a torchlit confession via instruments with names like the soul unfastener or the rib key. And that confession wouldn't stop until you admitted to poisoning half the royal court and their favorite dog. You might think that successfully killing a tyrant or preventing a civil war would earn you honor, gratitude, a place in history. Think again. You were an assassin. That meant your name was never supposed to be remembered, not whispered in reverence, not etched in stone. Your legacy was silence, an unmarked grave if you were lucky, a spike over the gate if you weren't. The client didn't want a hero. They wanted deniability. If your name came up at all, it was only so it could be erased. Even if you pulled off the century's most legendary assassination, silenced a usurper, ended a blood feud, shifted the line of succession, history would list it as mysterious death. At best, you'd be a rumor, the hooded figure in the shadows, the foreigner who left town too quietly, the monk with too many knives. And if someone didn't know your name, that was a liability. And liabilities in this trade didn't get pensions. They got cleaned up. No medals, no songs, no thanks. And forget about honor. Nobles built statues of themselves. You got pine box, maybe. More often, a ditch and a stone no one dare visit. If you became infamous, it was only as a warning. Don't cross Lord Bran. Remember what happened to Ulrich. And the man who made that happen? Gone. Forgotten. Ghosted out of history. That was your mark on the world. Not fame. Not fear. Just absence. Now let's pretend everything went right. The job succeeded. You lived. You even managed to get paid, which was, in itself, a miracle. Now what? You lay low. You kept quiet. Trusted that your client, the one who paid you in whispers and silver, would protect your name and cover your trail. Except no, because if there's one golden rule in medieval assassination, it's this: never trust anyone, especially not the person who hired you. Your client wasn't your ally. They were someone who needed something done, something too vile for their own hands. And now that the deed was finished, you were the last thread dangling from their cloak. You knew too much. Who wanted you dead? Why? When? How much they paid? What poison they preferred? They made you not just dangerous to their enemies, but dangerous to them. So what do? They disappeared, vanished in a court life, or rode off to another castle with new secrets and no trace of you. Or worse, they sent someone else, a cleanup crew, another blade, hired not to kill a noble, but to tie off the contract in blood. There were even cases where clients hired two assassins, one to do the job and another to immediately kill the first, just in case. No refunds, no loyalty, just reduced risk. And heaven help you if you try to get clever. Try to blackmail a client. Leverage what you knew. That was your final mistake. Powerful people didn't bargain with assassins. They buried them. Even if you did everything right, no witnesses, no questions, no trace, your clients still might see you as a threat. Because if you could kill for them, you could kill them. And no one in power likes to go to bed wondering if the man they hired might be the man waiting in their corridor one day. Let's say by some divine twist of fate, you survived all of this. The jobs, the lies, the poisons, the betrayals. What then? You outlived your enemies, your employers, and probably your own sense of morality. Now what? You retire? Absolutely not. Because in medieval times, assassins didn't get retirement plans. There were no farewell banquets, no quiet cottages by the sea, no pensions paid in gold coins and grateful whispers. You didn't fade into a peaceful life. You vanished, or you died. Often both. The problem was simple. You were never safe. Even if you walked away from the job, your past didn't. You had too many secrets in your head, too many names in your memory, and too much blood on your hands. People didn't want you retired. They wanted you forgotten, which usually meant buried. And even if no one came after you, and that's a big if, you had to live with the constant fear that someone might. That a new assassin, young and eager to prove himself, had just received a contract for a shadowy figure who used to be someone dangerous. So you changed your name again. You moved to a village where no one asked questions. You faked a limp, sold herbs, pretended you once worked as a guard. But even then, you didn't sleep well. You avoided crowds. You always sat facing the door. You kept your dagger under the floorboard next to the pouch of coins you never touched because it still smelled like the man you earned it from. And you couldn't trust yourself either. Years of silent killings and quick escapes did something to your brain. Every knock on the door made you flinch. Every stranger on the road might recognize you. You stopped dreaming because dreaming was dangerous. You couldn't love. You couldn't relax. You couldn't laugh too loud. You lived like a ghost pretending to be a man. The truth was, there was no endgame for a medieval assassin. Just a slow, cold fade into obscurity, always moving, always watching, until one day you slipped into the dark and no one noticed. And maybe that was the best you could hope for. By now, you've probably figured it out. Being a medieval assassin wasn't darkly romantic. It wasn't noble. It wasn't even all that profitable. It was a grim, thankless, short-lived career wrapped in blood-stained linen and followed by a crowd of people who wanted you dead. You wouldn't last. Not a week, maybe not even a day, because you'd start with the wrong assumptions. That you'd be sleek, in control, a whisper in the dark. But what you'd really be is cold, hungry, and one bad guess away from the noose. You'd slip into town, cloak pulled tight, ready for action, only to discover that your target moved locations. The guards are drunk, but trigger-happy, and the stable boy you paid for information just sold you out for a mug of ale and a piece of bread. You'd freeze at the wrong time, stab the wrong guy, get spotted by someone's maid who once saw your face near the chapel, and suddenly you're not a shadow. You're the problem. Then what? You run. But you're not used to medieval terrain. The mud, the uneven cobblestones, the absolutely insane number of loose chickens in the street. You slip, fall, get tackled by a guard named Thomas who just got dumped and is looking for an outlet. And let's say you survive that. Then you deal with the aftermath. No allies, no honor, and no future. Just whispers, suspicion, and the growing realization that even if you succeed, the best you can hope for is to die old and alone, hiding behind a false name in a village that still believes in fairies. So no, you wouldn't last. And frankly, you shouldn't try. Because the assassin's life wasn't cool. It was a cruel machine that chewed people up and spat out nothing but shadows. It offered power without peace and purpose without a place in the world. You didn't make history. You erased yourself from it. And the only thing waiting for you at the end was silence. A silence no one would question because no one even remembered you were there in the first place. Before she was the feared queen of Macedonia, Olympias was known as Myrtle, a Meletian princess from the rugged tribal lands of Epirus. Her people claimed descent from Achilles himself. And whether or not the blood of heroes truly ran in her veins, one thing was certain. This was not a woman born for the sidelines of history. From a young age, Myrtle was steeped in mystery and ritual. Her upbringing was shaped not just by politics, but by prophecy, ecstatic rites, and a reverence for the ancient gods. She wasn't the type of princess who smiled and embroidered tapestries. No, she was drawn to serpents, omens, and the frenzied ceremonies of the cult of Dionysus, where women danced barefoot in the moonlight and called upon the divine in states of trance. Her connection to the gods wasn't performative. It was personal. She didn't merely worship, she embodied. According to ancient sources, likely written by men both terrified and enthralled, she kept sacred snakes in her chambers and even allowed them to coil beside her in bed. Whether this was literal fact or the kind of slander that powerful women attract like flies, we'll never know. But it stuck. To her allies, it made her divine. To her enemies, it made her dangerous. Her real power began not on a battlefield or throne room, but in the uneasy flicker of torchlight among the whispers of priestesses and the curling bodies of serpents. She wasn't just a princess. She was a living oracle, a woman touched by something older than politics and colder than steel. So when Philip II of Macedon, brutal, brilliant, and famously ambitious, arrived at the island of Samothrace for a religious initiation, he didn't just meet a beautiful princess. He met a mystery he couldn't resist. Their marriage wasn't just a political alliance. It was a collision of prophecy and power. and from the very beginning, it was full of omens. Some said lightning struck the sky on their wedding night. Others claimed Olympias dreamed of a thunderbolt entering her womb. All of it would become legend. But one thing is certain. The union of Olympias and Philip didn't just create a child. It created Alexander the Great, and she intended to shape his destiny from the very first breath. Olympias's marriage to Philip II was not the fairy tale one might expect for a queen who would one day birth an empire. From the beginning, it was a combustible mix of prophecy, pride, and paranoia. Philip, ruthless, charismatic, and already collecting wives like trophies, married Olympias around 357 BCE. She was likely just a teenager, but she wasn't naive. She saw in Philip a man whose ambition matched her own, and perhaps even a divine match for her spiritual destiny. Macedon wasn't exactly an easy kingdom to walk into. It was a land of iron and ambition, where kings were killed by cousins and brothers turned into rivals overnight. But Olympias, the priestess of Epirus, walked in with her head held high and eyes already on the crown. Their marriage was rocky from the very beginning. Philip, for all his military brilliance and political genius, was never built for monogamy. He collected wives the way some men collected alliances, as tools of strategy, power, and expansion. He didn't hide his infidelities, and he certainly didn't restrain them. But Olympias was not the kind of woman to quietly fade into the background of a royal court. No, she built a court of her own. She maintained influence through her lineage, her charisma, and her unwavering connection to the divine. She turned to oracles, rites, and the whispers of priestesses not only to divine her future, but perhaps to shape Philip's fate as well. Then came the birth of Alexander, and even that, like everything else in Olympias's life, arrived drenched in divine omen and celestial spectacle. Legends claim she dreamed of a thunderbolt entering her womb, and that flames licked around the newborn without burning him. Philip, not to be outdone in mysticism, supposedly envisioned sealing his wife's womb with the image of a lion. Yes, a literal lion. Whether these were genuine visions or convenient myths, what mattered was how they were believed. And in the belief of Macedon, Alexander wasn't just a prince. He was destined, not just to rule a kingdom, but to conquer the world. Yet even as the boy grew and the omens multiplied, the cracks in the royal marriage widened. Olympias hated Philip's other wives, but none more than the Macedonian bride he married later in life, Cleopatra Eurydice. She was no foreign princess, no political pawn from afar. She was Macedonian-born, local, and therefore dangerous. Any son she bore would have the bloodline to challenge Alexander's legitimacy in the eyes of the nobles. And Olympias saw that threat clearer than anyone. The palace was no longer a home. It was a battlefield. And Olympias, armed with serpents, dreams, rituals, and strategic whispers, made it clear no one would steal her son's future. She was no longer the barefoot priestess of Epirus. She was Olympias now, a queen forged in prophecy, crowned in ambition, and cloaked in wrath. By the time Alexander reached his teenage years, the royal palace at Pella had become a minefield of political maneuvering, icy glares, and veiled threats. Olympias was no longer just defending influence. She was fighting for survival. She knew the palace was crawling with snakes. But what they didn't know was that she had taught the snakes to bite. Philip began to drift. He drank more. He listened to his Macedonian advisors more. And worst of all, he began to treat Olympias as an obstacle, not a partner. The final betrayal came when he publicly married Cleopatra Eurydice, niece of his powerful general Attalus. To Olympias, it wasn't just a marriage. It was war. At the wedding feast, Attalus mocked her, and Alexander, in a drunken tirade. He questioned Alexander's legitimacy. Was he really Philip's son, or was he the child of a god, as Olympias had always claimed? Meant as an insult, the words only fueled the myth. Let them whisper, Olympias thought. Let them believe. If Alexander was touched by Zeus, then no mortal rival could touch him. Alexander stormed out. Olympias left the palace entirely, retreating to her homeland in Epirus. But this was no surrender. This was strategy. From afar, she could watch Philip's court decay from the inside. She didn't need to be in the palace to pull strings. Her presence lingered in every shadow. Then the shock. Philip II was assassinated at his daughter's wedding, just as he stood on the edge of greatness, preparing to invade Persia and crown himself emperor of the known world. The palace erupted in chaos. Who did it? Was it Pausanias, the spurned bodyguard? Was it internal court betrayal? Was it Alexander himself? Or, whispered in the dark with held breath, was it Olympias? No one knew for sure. No one could prove it, but many believed it. What came next made the whispers louder. Within days, Cleopatra Eurydice and her newborn child were dead. Murdered, some said, by Olympias herself. And if true, she didn't hide it well. Her vengeance wasn't just cold. It was theatrical. Some claimed Cleopatra was forced to hang herself after being forced to witness the murder of her infant daughter. Others said Olympias had the child thrown onto a burning pyre as a message. Whatever the exact method, one thing was certain: there was no mercy. Olympias understood something that many royal women didn't. In the ruthless halls of power, mercy was a weakness. A rival child, even a baby, was a war waiting to happen. She wasn't waiting anymore. With her rivals dead and Philip gone, she turned her full focus on Alexander. Her son, bold, brilliant, already tutored by Aristotle, was declared king. It happened fast, without serious opposition. But make no mistake, this wasn't just the weight of his bloodline or the echo of Philip's legacy. This was Olympias. She knew exactly who to threaten, who to flatter, and who to remove, quietly, permanently. Her web of influence extended from priests to generals. She wasn't just defending Alexander's throne, she was constructing it. Alexander reportedly disapproved of the brutal handling of Cleopatra's family. But he didn't stop it. Deep down, he understood what Olympias had always known. In Macedon, power wasn't inherited. It was seized, soaked in blood, and guarded with knives. With Alexander crowned and preparing to launch his campaign into Persia, Olympias appeared to step back from the spotlight. But it wasn't retreat. It was repositioning. She shed the title of active queen, but held the role of spiritual guardian. She sent relics. She performed sacred rites. She consulted oracles on his behalf. In her mind, Alexander's war wasn't about conquest. It was about fate. And while he marched toward Asia, she remained in Macedon, ruling without a throne. Officially, regency passed to Antipater, one of Alexander's trusted generals. But Olympias did not recognize him as an equal. She wrote to Alexander constantly, not with maternal warmth, but with calculated purpose. Her letters were filled with omens, warnings, and political strategy. She questioned his companions. She criticized his Persian influences, his wives, even his godlike image. No one else would dare say such things to a conquering king. But she wasn't anyone. She was Olympias. And Alexander, for all his distance, for all his power, read every word. Back home, Antipater began to resent her. She undermined him subtly and openly. She used her influence in Epirus and Thessaly among nobles and priests. She stirred rumors like a seasoned alchemist. She reminded them who had birthed the king. And with Olympias, a whisper could ignite a war. Her letters became sharper, more urgent. She warned Alexander that Antipater was growing too powerful, too confident. He was no longer a regent. He was a shadow king. And Olympias, watching from her sanctum, wrapped in rituals and suspicion, feared history repeating itself. Another Philip, another betrayal. But Alexander didn't act. He needed Antipater to maintain order in his absence. And so, the tension stretched. Olympias waited, furious and patient, a priestess with a vendetta and a queen with unfinished business. She hadn't spent decades surviving palace betrayals and blood-drenched politics just to bow to an aging general. As Alexander's empire stretched from the Aegean to the edge of India, Olympias saw what others refused to see: cracks forming beneath the weight of victory. Her son was taking on too much, listening to too many foreign advisors, slipping further away from the divine mission she had crafted for him. To her, his greatness wasn't born from politics or battlefield tactics. It was born of prophecy, of her. And if he was forgetting that, Olympias knew how to remind even kings who they were, even if that king was her own flesh and blood. When the news of Alexander's death in Babylon reached Macedon in 323 BCE, it wasn't a funeral march. It was a dagger. The divine storm she had carried, raised, anointed, was gone. And with him, the empire she had helped build began to unravel. There was no clear air, only chaos. Generals who had once kneeled to him now sharpened blades against one another. Antipater still held sway in Macedon, and he had no affection for Olympias. Worse still, her daughter Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, was being courted by rival commanders, each hoping to stake their claim on the empire through blood and marriage. Civil war wasn't looming. It had already begun to whisper in the halls. But Olympias still had a card to play, a final tether to her son's legacy. Young Alexander IV, born to Roxana, the Bactrian princess Alexander married. The boy, her grandson, was now a living relic of empire, and in his veins ran the blood of gods and kings. She knew the child would be both target and throne, so she forged an alliance with Roxana, vowing to protect the boy and use his presence as a weapon in the ever-tightening game of power. The old loyalties were gone. The warlords who once bowed to Alexander now sought crowns of their own. They didn't fear Olympias, not yet, but she had survived worse. She had danced with serpents, whispered in oracles, and outlasted kings. She waited. She watched. Then Antipater died, and his son Cassander, colder, crueler, took the reins. It was inevitable. They would clash. The serpent queen of Macedon and the vulture-eyed usurper. Years passed. Alexander was gone, but his shadow still moved across the world, and Olympias was still coiled within it. While others gave up their claims and withdrew, she stayed present, ready to strike, calculating her return to the throne not for herself, but for the future of her bloodline. She became a myth, a warning, and a threat all at once. Then she struck. With boldness that stunned even her allies, Olympias returned to Macedon not in mourning, but in command. She joined forces with Polyperchon, a general with just enough legitimacy to offer cover, and marched into the heart of the fractured kingdom. As her feet touched home soil, cities opened their gates. Soldiers defected. Her name alone did more than any sword. And then came her vengeance. Philip III Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother and puppet king, was executed. His wife Eurydice was offered the blade. When she refused, Olympias had her strangled. No mercy, no pretense. She didn't rule with subtlety. She ruled like a goddess of war, cloaked in justice and prophecy. She declared the blood of Alexander sacred. All others? Pretenders. Even children were not exempt. For in Olympias's eyes, any rival bloodline was a seed of future rebellion. She had seen too many sons of enemies grow up to wield swords. This time, she would cut the root before it grew. For a flickering moment, Macedon bent to her will. She had avenged betrayals, restored her grandson's claim, and reminded the world what royal wrath truly looked like. But power in Macedon burned fast. Cassander returned, with a bigger army, deeper pockets, and a heart of iron. Olympias' allies abandoned her. Polyperchon lost influence. One by one, the walls closed in. Where once crowds cheered her name, now whispers of fear and resentment grew. Her triumph had been swift and terrifying. She retreated to Pydna, a coastal fortress, and prepared for the siege. Surrounded, starving, betrayed, but unbroken. For nearly a year, she endured like a carved monument to divine rage. Food dwindled. Disease crept. Her soldiers faltered. Yet within those walls, Olympias never bent. She was still the mother of a god, and even in ruin, she was regal. Her presence alone sustained morale. A woman in rags, standing with spine straight and eyes unyielding, staring down death like an old companion. Cassander hesitated. To kill her outright would be sacrilege. She was legend. She was myth. So he offered her terms: surrender and live. But Olympias had heard royal promises before. Her defenders surrendered. She did not. Even as her last allies laid down their arms, she stood at the parapets, robes tattered, hair matted, gaze defiant. She had become less woman, more symbol. Cassander didn't kill her himself. That would have made her a martyr. Instead, he handed her over to the families of those she had executed. Let vengeance wear a human face. But when they came to carry out the sentence, no one would raise a hand. She stood before them, frail but unmoved, eyes like fire, voice like prophecy. They had grown up with stories of her visions, her snakes, her son who conquered the world. They couldn't touch her. So Cassander brought outsiders, men with no memory of her glory, only orders. And with that, the Serpent Queen was slain. Not in battle, not on a throne, but in silence. The last ember of Alexander's divine line extinguished. And yet, even in death she endured. History remembers her not for mercy, but for might. She wielded prophecy like a weapon and motherhood like a crown. She wasn't just Alexander's mother. She was his maker. His myth could not have existed without hers. Where he brought fire, she brought fury. Where he conquered lands, she conquered fate. Without her, his star may never have risen. She never led armies in a battle like Boudica. She didn't seduce emperors like Cleopatra. Her arena was darker. Chambers of whisper, ritual, poison, and belief. She taught the world to fear the unseen power behind the throne. The mother, the priestess, the serpent in silk. Her enemies called her murderer, witch, tyrant. And they were right. But they never called her irrelevant. She wasn't a footnote in a king's story. She was the story. Her legend shaped courts long after her bones had turned to dust. Even those who hated her spoke her name with a kind of reverence, as if invoking something ancient and coiled. Olympias turned to dust long ago, but her legend remains. In every ruthless queen, in every whisper of blood-born destiny, in every empire built on myth, she is still there, waiting. Beneath every crown lies a shadow, and in that shadow, if you listen closely, you can still hear her hiss. She hadn't spent decades surviving palace betrayals and blood-drenched politics just to bow to an aging general. As Alexander's empire stretched from the Aegean to the edge of India, Olympias saw what others refused to see, cracks forming beneath the weight of victory. Her son was taking on too much, listening to too many foreign advisors, slipping further away from the divine mission she had crafted for him. To her, his greatness wasn't born from politics or battlefield tactics. It was born of prophecy, of her. And if he was forgetting that, Olympias knew how to remind even kings who they were, even if that king was her own flesh and blood. When the news of Alexander's death in Babylon reached Macedon in 323 BCE, it wasn't a funeral march. It was a dagger. The divine storm she had carried, raised, anointed, was gone. And with him, the empire she had helped build began to unravel. There was no clear air, only chaos. Generals who had once kneeled to him now sharpened blades against one another. Antipater still held sway in Macedon, and he had no affection for Olympias. Worse still, her daughter Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, was being courted by rival commanders, each hoping to stake their claim on the empire through blood and marriage. Civil war wasn't looming. It had already begun to whisper in the halls. But Olympias still had a card to play, a final tether to her son's legacy. Young Alexander IV, born to Roxana, the Bactrian princess Alexander married. The boy, her grandson, was now a living relic of empire, and in his veins ran the blood of gods and kings. She knew the child would be both target and throne, so she forged an alliance with Roxana, vowing to protect the boy and use his presence as a weapon in the ever-tightening game of power. The old loyalties were gone. The warlords who once bowed to Alexander now sought crowns of their own. They didn't fear Olympias, not yet, but she had survived worse. She had danced with serpents, whispered in oracles, and outlasted kings. She waited. She watched. Then Antipater died, and his son Cassander, colder, crueler, took the reins. It was inevitable. They would clash, the serpent queen of Macedon and the vulture-eyed usurper. Years passed. Alexander was gone, but his shadow still moved across the world, and Olympias was still coiled within it. Then she struck. With boldness that stunned even her allies, Olympias returned to Macedon not in mourning, but in command. She joined forces with Polyperchon, a general with just enough legitimacy to offer cover, and marched into the heart of the fractured kingdom. As her feet touched home soil, cities opened their gates. Soldiers defected. Her name alone did more than any sword. And then came her vengeance. Philip III Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother and puppet king, was executed. His wife Eurydice was offered the blade. When she refused, Olympias had her strangled. No mercy, no pretense. She didn't rule with subtlety. She ruled like a goddess of war, cloaked in justice and prophecy. She declared the blood of Alexander sacred. All others? Pretenders. For a flickering moment, Macedon bent to her will. She had avenged betrayals, restored her grandson's claim, and reminded the world what royal wrath truly looked like. But power in Macedon burned fast. Cassander returned, with a bigger army, deeper pockets, and a heart of iron. Olympias' allies abandoned her. Polyperchon lost influence. One by one, the walls closed in. She retreated to Pydna, a coastal fortress, and prepared for the siege. Surrounded, starving, betrayed, but unbroken. For nearly a year, she endured like a carved monument to divine rage. Food dwindled. Disease crept. Her soldiers faltered. Yet within those walls, Olympias never bent. She was still the mother of a god, and even in ruin, she was regal. Cassander hesitated. To kill her outright would be sacrilege. She was legend. She was myth. So he offered her terms: surrender and live. But Olympias had heard royal promises before. Her defenders surrendered. She did not. Cassander didn't kill her himself. That would have made her a martyr. Instead, he handed her over to the families of those she had executed. Let vengeance wear a human face. But when they came to carry out the sentence, no one would raise a hand. She stood before them, frail but unmoved, eyes like fire, voice like prophecy. They had grown up with stories of her visions, her snakes, her son who conquered the world. They couldn't touch her. So Cassander brought outsiders, men with no memory of her glory, only orders. And with that, the Serpent Queen was slain. Not in battle, not on a throne, but in silence. The last ember of Alexander's divine line extinguished. And yet, even in death she endured. History remembers her not for mercy, but for might. She wielded prophecy like a weapon and motherhood like a crown. She wasn't just Alexander's mother. She was his maker. His myth could not have existed without hers. Where he brought fire, she brought fury. Where he conquered lands, she conquered fate. She never led armies into battle like Boudica. She didn't seduce emperors like Cleopatra. Her arena was darker. Chambers of whisper, ritual, poison, and belief. She taught the world to fear the unseen power behind the throne. The mother, the priestess, the serpent in silk. Her enemies called her murderer, witch, tyrant. And they were right. But they never called her irrelevant. She wasn't a footnote in a king's story. She was the story. Olympias turned to dust long ago, but her legend remains. In every ruthless queen, in every whisper of blood-born destiny, in every empire built on myth, she is still there, waiting. These unfortunate souls were said to be sacrificed to the Minotaur, a terrifying creature born from divine punishment and royal shame. Locked in an underground maze, the Minotaur wasn't just a monster. It was a symbol, a manifestation of the savage power hidden beneath the polished marble of kings. To the ancient Greeks, Crete was a land of enchantment, wealth, and mystery. Its seafaring people, the Minoans, were as elegant as they were alien. Their gods were strange, their rituals stranger, and their palaces unlike anything seen on the mainland. To a Greek traveler from 1000 BCE, the city of Knossos must have seemed like a vision from another world. Bulls leapt across frescoes. Sacred horns crowned rooftops and altars. Young men and women vaulted, overcharging beasts in what appeared to be ritual performances. The bull was more than an animal. It was divine. And the palace that honored it? A labyrinth in stone. No wonder a myth formed. But what if the Minotaur wasn't just a beast? What if it was a metaphor? Some scholars believe the tale reflects Athens' distant memory of Cretan dominance, a time when the mighty mainland paid tribute to an older, wealthier, and more sophisticated power. In that reading, the labyrinth represents political subjugation. The Minotaur, the raw, terrifying force behind Minoan control. Others go deeper. They see the labyrinth as the human subconscious, the Minotaur as the dark urges we hide, and Theseus as the brave soul who dares to enter and confront them, guided only by memory, love, and a thread. Still, history and myth remain tangled in Knossos. We've never found a literal labyrinth, no underground prison, no monstrous hybrid. But we have found something else, something deeper, a structure so complex, so confounding, that it seems almost sentient. Before Athens built her temples or Sparta forged her steel, the Minoans ruled the Aegean. Not through swords, but through ships, saffron, and grace. Based in Crete, they established one of Europe's earliest advanced civilizations, a network of trade that stretched from Egypt to Spain, from the Levant to the Cyclades. Their influence spread not with conquest, but with commerce and culture. And at the heart of it stood Knossos. Built around 1900 BCE and expanded over centuries, Knossos was more than a palace. It was a city under one roof, a royal seat, a sacred space, a logistical hub. It sprawled across nearly 150,000 square feet with over 1,000 rooms. Multi-storied, filled with light wells and frescoes, adorned with courtyards and workshops, it didn't look like a fortress. It looked like art. What set Minoan civilization apart was its aesthetic. Where later Greeks glorified war and divine punishment, the Minoans painted dolphins and dancers. Where others built walls, the Minoans built windows. Their goddesses weren't robed in modesty but bared their chests and held serpents, symbols of renewal, fertility, and mystery. And yet, for all their grandeur, the Minoans left no clear voice behind. Their script, linear, remains undeciphered. We don't know what they call themselves, what they prayed for, or what tragedies befell them. All we have are echoes, frescoes, vessels, legends. And Knossos itself. To walk its ruined halls today is to wander through time. Corridors twist without warning. Stairs descend into shadow or rise into sudden light. Rooms bloom in all directions. No straight lines. No easy paths. It feels alive. It feels designed to disorient, or perhaps to initiate. It's not hard to imagine a visitor whispering, "Labyrinth." Knossos wasn't a legend. It was real. And perhaps that's what makes the legend last. Because when myth rises from something tangible, something you can still touch, it never truly fades. She hadn't spent decades surviving palace betrayals and blood-drenched politics, just about to an aging general. As Alexander's empire stretched from the Aegean to the edge of India, Olympia saw what others refused to see, cracks forming beneath the weight of victory. Her son was taking on too much, listening to too many foreign advisors, slipping further away from the divine mission she had crafted for him. To her, his greatness wasn't born from politics or battlefield tactics. It was born of prophecy, of her. And if he was forgetting that, Olympias knew how to remind even kings who they were, even if that king was her own flesh and blood. When the news of Alexander's death in Babylon reached Macedon in 323 BCE, it wasn't a funeral march. It was a dagger. The divine storm she had carried, raised, anointed, was gone. And with him, the empire she had helped build began to unravel. There was no clear air, only chaos. Generals who had once kneeled to him now sharpened blades against one another. Antipater still held sway in Macedon, and he had no affection for Olympias. Worse still, her daughter Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, was being courted by rival commanders, each hoping to stake their claim on the empire through blood and marriage. Civil war wasn't looming. It had already begun to whisper in the halls. But Olympias still had a card to play, a final tether to her son's legacy. Young Alexander IV, born to Roxana, the Bactrian princess Alexander married. The boy, her grandson, was now a living relic of empire, and in his veins ran the blood of gods and kings. She knew the child would be both target and throne, so she forged an alliance with Roxana, vowing to protect the boy and use his presence as a weapon in the ever-tightening game of power. The old loyalties were gone. The warlords who once bowed to Alexander now sought crowns of their own. They didn't fear Olympias, not yet, but she had survived worse. She had danced with serpents, whispered in oracles, and outlasted kings. She waited. She watched. Then Antipater died, and his son Cassander, colder, crueler, took the reins. It was inevitable. They would clash, the serpent queen of Macedon and the vulture-eyed usurper. Years passed. Alexander was gone, but his shadow still moved across the world, and Olympias was still coiled within it. Then she struck. With boldness that stunned even her allies, Olympias returned to Macedon not in mourning, but in command. She joined forces with Polyperchon, a general with just enough legitimacy to offer cover, and marched into the heart of the fractured kingdom. As her feet touched home soil, cities opened their gates. Soldiers defected. Her name alone did more than any sword. And then came her vengeance. Philip III Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother and puppet king, was executed. His wife Eurydice was offered the blade. When she refused, Olympias had her strangled. No mercy, no pretense. She didn't rule with subtlety. She ruled like a goddess of war, cloaked in justice and prophecy. She declared the blood of Alexander sacred. All others? Pretenders. For a flickering moment, Macedon bent to her will. She had avenged betrayals, restored her grandson's claim, and reminded the world what royal wrath truly looked like. But power in Macedon burned fast. Cassander returned, with a bigger army, deeper pockets, and a heart of iron. Olympias' allies abandoned her. Polyperchon lost influence. One by one, the walls closed in. She retreated to Pydna, a coastal fortress, and prepared for the siege. Surrounded, starving, betrayed, but unbroken. For nearly a year, she endured like a carved monument to divine rage. Food dwindled. Disease crept. Her soldiers faltered. Yet within those walls, Olympias never bent. She was still the mother of a god, and even in ruin, she was regal. Cassander hesitated. To kill her outright would be sacrilege. She was legend. She was myth. So he offered her terms: surrender and live. But Olympias had heard royal promises before. Her defenders surrendered. She did not. Cassander didn't kill her himself. That would have made her a martyr. Instead, he handed her over to the families of those she had executed. Let vengeance wear a human face. But when they came to carry out the sentence, no one would raise a hand. She stood before them, frail but unmoved, eyes like fire, voice like prophecy. They had grown up with stories of her visions, her snakes, her son who conquered the world. They couldn't touch her. So Cassander brought outsiders, men with no memory of her glory, only orders. And with that, the Serpent Queen was slain. Not in battle, not on a throne, but in silence. The last ember of Alexander's divine line extinguished. And yet, even in death, she endured. History remembers her not for mercy, but for might. She wielded prophecy like a weapon and motherhood like a crown. She wasn't just Alexander's mother. She was his maker. His myth could not have existed without hers. Where he brought fire, she brought fury. Where he conquered lands, she conquered fate. She never led armies in a battle like Boudica. She didn't seduce emperors like Cleopatra. Her arena was darker, chambers of whisper, ritual, poison, and belief. She taught the world to fear the unseen power behind the throne, the mother, the priestess, the serpent in silk. Her enemies called her murderer, witch, tyrant, and they were right. But they never called her irrelevant. She wasn't a footnote in a king's story. She was the story. Olympias turned to dust long ago, but her legend remains. In every ruthless queen, in every whisper of blood-born destiny, in every empire built on myth, she is still there, waiting. These unfortunate souls were said to be sacrificed to the Minotaur, a terrifying creature born from divine punishment and royal shame. Locked in an underground maze, the Minotaur wasn't just a monster. It was a symbol, a manifestation of a savage power hidden beneath the polished marble of kings. To the ancient Greeks, Crete was a land of enchantment, wealth, and mystery. Its seafaring people, the Minoans, were as elegant as they were alien. Their gods were strange, their rituals stranger, and their palaces unlike anything seen on the mainland. To a Greek traveler from 1000 BCE, the city of Knossos must have seemed like a vision from another world. Bulls leapt across frescoes. Sacred horns crowned rooftops and altars. Young men and women vaulted over charging beasts in what appeared to be ritual performances. The bull was more than an animal. It was divine. And the palace that honored it? A labyrinth in stone. No wonder a myth formed. But what if the Minotaur wasn't just a beast? What if it was a metaphor? Some scholars believe the tale reflects Athens' distant memory of Cretan dominance, a time when the mighty mainland paid tribute to an older, wealthier, and more sophisticated power. In that reading, the labyrinth represents political subjugation. The Minotaur, the raw, terrifying force behind Minoan control. Others go deeper. They see the labyrinth as the human subconscious, the Minotaur as the dark urges we hide, and Theseus as the brave soul who dares to enter and confront them, guided only by memory, love, and a thread. Still, history and myth remain tangled in Knossos. We've never found a literal labyrinth, no underground prison, no monstrous hybrid. But we have found something else, something deeper, a structure so complex, so confounding, that it seems almost sentient. Before Athens built her temples, or Sparta forged her steel, the Minoans ruled the Aegean. Not through swords, but through ships, saffron, and grace. Based in Crete, they established one of Europe's earliest advanced civilizations, a network of trade that stretched from Egypt to Spain, from the Levant to the Cyclades. Their influence spread not with conquest, but with commerce and culture. And at the heart of it stood Knossos. Built around 1900 BCE and expanded over centuries, Knossos was more than a palace. It was a city under one roof, a royal seat, a sacred space, a logistical hub. It sprawled across nearly 150,000 square feet with over 1,000 rooms. Multi-storied, filled with light wells and frescoes, adorned with courtyards and workshops, it didn't look like a fortress. It looked like art. What set Minoan civilization apart was its aesthetic. Where later Greeks glorified war and divine punishment, the Minoans painted dolphins and dancers. Where others built walls, the Minoans built windows. Their goddesses weren't robed in modesty but bared their chests and held serpents, symbols of renewal, fertility, and mystery. And yet, for all their grandeur, the Minoans left no clear voice behind. Their script, linear A, remains undeciphered. We don't know what they called themselves, what they prayed for, or what tragedies befell them. All we have are echoes, frescoes, vessels, legends. And Knossos itself. To walk its ruined halls today is to wander through time. Corridors twist without warning. Stairs descend into shadow or rise into sudden light. Rooms bloom in all directions. No straight lines. No easy paths. It feels alive. It feels designed to disorient, or perhaps to initiate. It's not hard to imagine a visitor whispering, "Labyrinth." Knossos wasn't a legend. It was real. And perhaps that's what makes the legend last. Because when myth rises from something tangible, something you can still touch, it never truly fades. Edwardian imagination may have colored his reconstruction, but Sir Arthur Evans did what no one else dared. He brought Knossos back to life. He didn't just excavate ruins. He resurrected a Bronze Age civilization that predated classical Greece by over a millennium. A civilization steeped in artistry, maritime power, and mythic elegance. Evans' discovery of the still undeciphered linear, a script, ignited a wave of questions about early language, literacy, and how much of ancient history lies just beyond our reach. But Evans did more than brush away centuries of dirt. He peeled back the veil between legend and reality. The myth of the labyrinth wasn't just poetic invention. It was rooted in something tangible, something haunting and deeply human. A palace that truly felt like a maze. A civilization that shimmered on the edge of shadow. A story far stranger and more beautiful than even he had expected. Knossos had slumbered for 3,000 years. Evans rang the bell that woke it. To walk through Knossos today is to walk through a language not of words, but of symbols. Frescoes, carvings, and geometric patterns speak where no Rosetta Stone remains. The Minoans' linear, a script still resists our understanding. So we read their world through art. Vivid dolphins diving over bathtubs, lilies blooming on plaster, women in tiered skirts with bare chests, and youths vaulting bulls in midair. This wasn't decoration. It was identity. It was cosmology. Unlike later Greek cultures obsessed with war, conquest, and Olympian triumph, Minoan art feels alive, fluid, natural. It pulses with the rhythm of life, of sea, of season, of the divine. Even scenes of tension possess elegance. The Minoans weren't recording victories. They were documenting harmony, cycles of existence, rites of passage, and cosmic order. At the heart of their spiritual language stands one symbol above all, the double axe or labyrinth. Etched into stone, painted on frescoes, and placed in shrines throughout the palace. It likely held deep religious meaning. Perhaps it was linked to female divinity or celestial rhythms. Some even suggest that the very word labyrinth derives from labyrinth, making the labyrinth not a trap, but a sacred house of the double axe. Then there are the horns of consecration, stylized bull horns rising from rooftops and altars, marking thresholds between sacred and mundane. Together with the recurring imagery of bull-leaping rituals, they hint at a society where nature, power, and spirituality danced in unison. The bull wasn't feared, it was venerated. A symbol of chaos, yes, but also of life and divine strength. Even the architecture of Knossos may carry spiritual weight. Some scholars argue it was constructed to mirror celestial patterns or seasonal cycles, a physical journey through life, death, and rebirth. Its twisting corridors, nested rooms, and sudden shafts of light might represent not confusion, but transformation. Yet with no deciphered texts, each interpretation wavers between insight and imagination. The Minoans spoke in symbols, not stories. And so we follow the traces they left, the echo of meaning, the visual rhythm, the myth beneath the marble. Knossos may be a ruin, but it doesn't feel dead. Walk its hallways, and something stirs. Echoes of lives, of rites, of questions that refuse to fade. Thousands of years later, the labyrinth still holds us. Tourists roam, scholars debate, writers dream. The Minotaur may be legend, but the labyrinth's pull is very real. We don't know who ruled Knossos. Their names, their laws, their sacred hymns, they're lost to time. But we know they loved beauty. We know they worshipped nature. We know they sought harmony between architecture and myth, between life and ceremony. And we know they came first, before the Parthenon, before Rome, before the temples of Jerusalem or Persepolis. There was Knossos, a palace that was also a city that was also a temple that was also a myth. Because maybe that's what the labyrinth really is, not a puzzle to solve, but a story to feel, a narrative in stone, a mystery made sacred by time. The legend of the Minotaur didn't emerge from nothing. It came from these halls, this architecture, these rituals, The Greeks turned it into epic. Evans turned it into archaeology. But Knossos was always both. We can now photograph its ruins, chart its corridors, and digitally reconstruct its faded frescoes. But the mystery endures. The line between truth and myth still shimmers like heat above sun-baked stone. Perhaps that's why Knossos survives. Not because it explains everything, but because it leaves us yearning to know more. It reminds us that some histories aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be entered. Knossos is not just a place. It's a question. And like Theseus, we are still following the thread. When set up properly, trebuchets could batter an entire city into submission from a secure distance. This marked a seismic shift in the psychology of warfare. For the first time in human history, thick, towering stone walls, once considered impregnable and symbolic of a city's strength, were forced to withstand not only brute force from below, but also calculated destruction raining from the skies above. The very concept of urban defense had to evolve, because now death came not just from charging armies, but from the heavens themselves. If the catapult was an embodiment of clever engineering, then the trebuchet was the very personification of majestic terror. Towering in height, groaning with tension, and creaking ominously before launch, the trebuchet was not just a siege engine. It was an announcement. Its presence on the battlefield declared a message with chilling clarity. Your walls cannot protect you. Unlike earlier torsion-based machines, the trebuchet relied on a brilliantly simple and reliable force: gravity. The mechanics were elegant. A massive wooden arm, mounted on a robust frame, carried a counterweight on its short end and a sling on its long end. When the heavy weight was dropped, the short arm plunged downward, causing the long arm to whip upward and forward, propelling the sling in a precise arc and sending its payload flying high over enemy battlements. The destructive power of this apparatus was awe-inspiring, its accuracy unsettling. The origins of the trebuchet can be traced back to early Chinese traction trebuchets, used as far back as the 4th century BC. These were powered by manpower, with soldiers yanking ropes attached to the short end of the arm. But it was not until the 12th century CE that the counterweight trebuchet emerged in Europe and the Islamic world, possibly passed down through Byzantine or Muslim innovators. Once this technology reached European engineers, it ignited a revolution in siege warfare. A well-built counterweight trebuchet was a devastating machine. Some could launch 300-pound stones over distances exceeding 300 meters. The sheer kinetic energy of these impacts was sufficient to demolish defensive towers, collapse sections of thick walls, and create chaos and panic among defenders. But its prowess wasn't limited to brute force. The arc of its projectile gave it the ability to reach deep into a besieged city, striking not just the outer defenses, but the heart of the city itself. Granaries, barracks, wells, and morale. And it wasn't just rocks that the trebuchet hurled. It could become a weapon of psychological and biological warfare. Historical records tell of diseased corpses being flung over city walls to spread plague and terror. Barrels of burning pitch, pots filled with lime to blind soldiers, and even notes and insults wrapped around stones were launched. One of the most legendary examples is Warwolf, a massive trebuchet constructed by King Edward I of England during the siege of Stirling Castle. The machine was so fearsome that the defenders attempted to surrender before it was even fired. The king, however, refused to accept the surrender until Warwolf had been unleashed, simply to witness its raw power. Despite its grandeur, the trebuchet was not a swift instrument. It could take days or weeks to construct, hours to position and aim, and minutes to reload and fire. Its operation required not just brute strength, but engineering precision and coordination. Still, when that counterweight dropped and the arm flung skyward, there was a moment of silent anticipation across the battlefield, followed by a devastating crash. It was slow-motion destruction, deliberate and unstoppable. While battering rams shattered gates and catapults hurled destruction from afar, siege towers offered a more personal and terrifying experience. They were towering wooden behemoths on wheels, often clad in fireproofed hides or metal plating, and bristling with archers and infantry. Their purpose? To roll right up to enemy walls and deliver soldiers directly onto the battlements. The siege tower was essentially an armored personnel carrier combined with a vertical assault platform. As it crept forward, defenders would unleash a torrent of arrows, fire, and boulders in desperate attempts to halt its advance. But if it reached the walls, a drawbridge would drop, and soldiers would pour out onto the ramparts, turning the siege from an external assault into chaotic hand-to-hand combat. The Assyrians were among the earliest users of siege towers, but the concept was perfected by Hellenistic engineers. One of the most audacious examples was during the Siege of Rhodes in 305 BC, when Demetrius I constructed the Hellepolis, or Taker of Cities, a 9-story tower over 100 feet tall, fitted with catapults, iron plating, and manned by thousands. Though it ultimately collapsed under its own weight, it epitomized the ambition and theatricality of siege warfare. Still, towers had their weaknesses. They were cumbersome, vulnerable to muddy terrain, and highly flammable. Defenders dug trenches, flooded moats, and built secondary walls to prevent their approach. Yet when successful, siege towers turned a fortress's greatest asset, its height, into a deadly liability. But not all siege warfare unfolded above ground. Some of its most terrifying and effective tactics happened in silence, underground. Siege tunneling, or sapping, was the grim art of digging beneath enemy walls to collapse them from below. The method was as old as siege warfare itself. Engineers would tunnel under the wall, prop it up with wooden supports, then set those supports ablaze. When they burned away, the tunnel collapsed, bringing the wall down with it. There was nothing glamorous about tunneling. It was claustrophobic, dangerous, and brutally effective. The Assyrians used early versions, but by the classical Greek and medieval periods, tunneling became an established science. During the Siege of Plataea in 429 BC, Spartans tunneled under Athenian walls, only to be met by defenders who dug counter-tunnels, resulting in subterranean skirmishes in total darkness. Fighting underground was terrifying. Dim torchlight, choking dust, and hand-to-hand combat with picks and knives. One of the most infamous tunneling operations occurred in 1215 during the siege of Rochester Castle. King John's engineers dug beneath a tower, packed the tunnel with pig fat, and set it on fire. The supports collapsed and brought the entire tower down, breaking the defender's spirit. By the 13th century, siege engineers were specialists who studied soil composition, pressure points, and architectural weaknesses. They were part geologist, part saboteur, and their skill meant that even the strongest wall had a fatal flaw. If you couldn't go over a wall, and you couldn't break through it, you could always make it fall from beneath. Of course, defenders weren't helpless. For every deadly innovation created by attackers, defenders developed brutal countermeasures. And among the most terrifying of these was fire. Specifically, Greek fire, the Byzantine Empire's secret weapon that would redefine naval and siege warfare alike. But that tale of unquenchable flame and chemical alchemy is a story for another time. By the 7th century CE, the ancient world was introduced to a weapon so fearsome, so enigmatic, that would etch its name into history as one of warfare's most terrifying innovations, Greek fire. This was no ordinary flame. Greek fire clung to skin, engulfed sails, and consumed wooden hulls. And the worst part? It burned even on water. Naval battles that once hinged on maneuver and boarding became hellish infernos. Ships that were once proud instruments of empire were reduced to flaming skeletons in mere minutes. And those caught in its path had little hope of escape. This mysterious, napalm-like substance was launched in ceramic pots, hurled by catapults, or sprayed through pressurized siphons mounted on ships and city walls. The formula? A guarded state secret so well protected that it died with the Byzantine Empire. Even today, with all our chemical knowledge, we still don't know exactly how it was made. That's the kind of terror Greek fire inspired, a weapon that became a myth in its own time. But Greek fire was just the beginning. Drop of blood low-tech, high-terror defenses. Not every castle had access to alchemy. For many defenders, boiling liquids were their last, scalding line of defense. Water, oil, or even hot sand became weapons of horrifying efficiency, poured through murder holes in ceilings or poured down narrow stairs to meet attackers climbing up siege ladders. Boiling oil, in particular, was a nightmare. Unlike water, it stuck to the skin. It soaked into clothing, seeped under armor, and then, if ignited, set the very body aflame. A soldier doused in hot oil was often reduced to a writhing, screaming torch. The pain was unspeakable. The psychological toll? Immeasurable. Even hot sand, though visually unimpressive, was no less vicious. It slipped quietly into armor gaps, around the neck under the wrist guards, and cooked the flesh beneath. It didn't kill instantly. It tormented. And then there were gravity weapons. Massive stones, logs, even rotting carcasses dropped from great heights onto siege engines or clustered troops below. They didn't just crush bodies, they broke morale. You might dodge a sword, but how do you dodge a cow falling from tower? Castles became puzzles of pain, riddled with hidden pits, collapsing bridges, and trap-laden courtyards. Every hallway was a question. Every door, a dare. Hourglass not done siege warfare, a game of nerves. For the defenders, time was everything. The longer the walls held, the more disease spread in the besieging camp. The more supplies ran dry. The more likely reinforcements would arrive. Every boiling pot of oil, every stone flung from the ramparts was not just an act of defense, it was a countdown, a delaying tactic in a war of patience. And for the attackers, siege warfare wasn't just about breaching the walls. It was about breaking the mind. Skull siege as psychological warfare. The real weapon of siege warfare wasn't wood or fire or steel, it was fear. Imagine standing behind the walls of your city, watching your enemy build massive engines of war in plain sight. Siege towers the size of buildings, trebuchets with arms longer than trees, battering rams with monstrous iron heads shaped like beasts. You hear the groan of winches, the clatter of rope, the rhythmic thud of battering rams pounding against your gates like the beating of some infernal heart. You see boulders arc through the sky with unnatural precision. You hear silence. Then, boom, a tower collapses. And then comes the message. Sometimes it was a severed head, or a flaming corpse, still in armor, crashing into the courtyard, or diseased bodies, launched to rot among the living and spread sickness behind the walls. During the Mongol siege of Kaffa in 1346, plague-infected corpses were flung into the city, likely igniting the Black Death that would ravage Europe for decades. Fear was a payload. Siege was theater. The enemy wasn't just trying to get in, they were trying to get into your head. Bomb the gunpowder revolution. But all things end, even the age of trebuchets and towers. By the 15th century, siege warfare was changed forever with the invention of the cannon. One iron ball, fired at the right place, could bring down walls that had stood for centuries. Trebuchets took hours to load and fire. Cannons? Seconds. Stone walls became a liability. The towering castles of Europe, once unassailable fortresses, crumbled like chalk under the iron thunder of cannon fire. Fortifications had to evolve or die. But even in this new era, the lessons of ancient siege warfare lived on. The principles of trajectory, force, timing, and shock remained. A modern howitzer is still solving the same problem a Roman catapult once did: how to break the unbreakable from a distance. Even today, in the age of drones and cyber warfare, siege tactics haven't disappeared. They've gone digital. Cross swords, the digital siege. Cities are still surrounded. But now, walls are made of firewalls, logistical blockades, or information blackouts. Supplies are cut off, not by ladders and arrows, but by economic sanctions, data disruption, or psychological manipulation. The siege is no longer just physical. It is economic, digital, and emotional. But the ancient instinct is the same. Someone wants in. Someone wants to keep them out. And both sides are willing to wait, starve, break, and bleed for victory. Castle legacy of a siege. The battering rams may be silent. The trebuchets are museum relics. But the spirit of siege warfare endures, as relentless as it ever was. We see it in the ramparts of Masada, still scarred by Roman siege ramps. The walls of Constantinople, which resisted every machine, until the Ottomans brought cannon fire. The angled bastions of European castles, redesigned again and again in a desperate race against the next weapon. And we feel it even now, whenever might challenges sanctuary. Siege warfare wasn't just about conquest. It was about resolve. A war of physics, patience, and fear. And in many ways, it still is.